Meet Mark. Mark is 50 years old, a regional operations manager, earning $94,000 a year. Last Tuesday, Mark opened his brokerage app and saw a number he had chased for 25 years. $1 million. 7 figures. He took a screenshot. He almost cried. By every visible measure, Mark had finally made it. He started looking at retirement calculators that night. He started pricing boats. He told his wife they could probably stop worrying now. Here's the problem. Mark just hit the single most dangerous net worth in America. Not because $1 million is too little. Because of what hitting it at 50 does to your brain. Within 90 days, Mark will make 3 decisions that quietly cost him almost $2 million in future wealth. He won't feel any of it happen. That's the trap. The number that feels like the finish line is almost always the most expensive mile of the race. And tonight, we're going to run Mark's actual numbers, decision by decision, so the same thing doesn't happen to you. Let's be clear about what $1 million actually is at 50. It feels enormous. For most of human history, it would have been generational wealth. But Mark isn't retiring into history. He's retiring into 2026, and the math has changed underneath him. Run the 4% rule on $1 million, and you get $40,000 of income in your first year. $40,000 before taxes. That's the number that's supposed to replace a $94,000 salary. Most people never do that subtraction. They see the 7-figure balance and they feel rich. They never translate the balance into a paycheck. And $40,000 in 2026 is not what $40,000 was even 5 years ago. Inflation ran at 3.8% this spring. That's not a one-time event. That's a tax on every future year of Mark's retirement, compounding against him while he sleeps. Here's what nobody tells Mark at his celebration dinner. He is 15 years away from Medicare. He is 12 years away from the earliest Social Security check. If he stops working now, he is entirely on his own for over a decade, funding everything from a pile of money that has to last him another 40 years. The danger was never the $1 million. The danger is the story he's about, to tell himself about it. Here's what the data shows. Let's keep this fair because this isn't about whether Mark is smart. He is. He saved $1 million on a middle-class salary. That takes real discipline. So let's compare him to someone exactly like him. Meet Maya. Maya is also 50. She also just crossed $1 million. Same age, same number, same proud screenshot. The only difference between Mark and Maya is what they decide to do in the next 90 days. And in 15 years, that single difference will be worth more than the $1 million itself. Here's Mark's plan. The number feels like permission. He's tired. He's been grinding for 25 years. And $1 million feels like the universe finally saying you can stop now. So Mark starts winding down. He stops contributing to his retirement account because why keep feeding a pile that's already huge? He upgrades his car because he's earned it. He starts taking money off the table, moving into safer, lower growth investments because he's scared of losing what he built. Every one of those decisions feels responsible. Every one of them feels like the reward for winning. Here's Maya's plan. Maya looks at the exact same $1 million and sees something completely different. She sees a fire that's finally big enough to keep itself alive if she just doesn't smother it. So Maya keeps contributing. She keeps her spending flat. She keeps the money invested for growth because she knows she has a 40-year runway and time is the only ingredient she can't buy more of. Maya isn't working harder than Mark. She's working about the same. She just refuses to treat the halfway point like the finish line. Now let's anchor the numbers, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. Both of them have $1 million at 50, assume a modest 7% average annual return, which is conservative for a diversified portfolio over a long horizon. If Mark stops contributing and shifts to a defensive 3% return to protect his money, his $1 million grows to roughly $1.6 million by age 65. If Maya keeps contributing $1,000 a month and stays invested at 7%, her $1 million grows to roughly $3.3 million by 65. Same starting line, same age. A gap of $1.7 million. And neither of them did anything that felt dramatic. The entire difference came from the story each of them told themselves the week they hit $1 million. This is the part that should scare you. Mark didn't make a single reckless decision. He didn't gamble. He didn't blow it on something stupid. He did everything that feels safe and mature and deserved. And that careful, deserved, sensible behavior is exactly what cost him $1.7 million. The trap doesn't look like a trap. It looks like a reward. It looks like rest. It looks like a 50-year-old man finally giving himself permission to relax. And that permission is the single most expensive thing he will ever buy. And here's why this happens to good people. The moment the balance crosses $1 million, the brain stops seeing a tool and starts seeing a trophy. A trophy is something you protect. A trophy is something you display. A trophy is something you stop adding to. But $1 million at 50 is not a trophy. It is raw material. It is only half built. Treating it like a finished monument is how you guarantee it stays half the size it could have been. Mark sees a monument. Maya sees a construction site. That's the whole ballgame. Psychologists who study retirees have noticed something strange. Many millionaires are too afraid to spend the money they spent decades building. They hoard, they worry, and the same people, the moment they felt rich, had already let their spending creep upward. It is the same brain reacting to the same number in two contradictory ways at once. Run the numbers, and the comfortable choice is the costly one almost every single time. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about hitting $1 million. A balance is not a paycheck, and your brain refuses to believe that. When Mark sees $1 million on his screen, his nervous system reacts to it like winning the lottery. But that $1 million has a job now. Its job is to pay Mark every year for the rest of his life. And it has to do that job for maybe 40 years. So let's actually turn the balance into a paycheck. The safe withdrawal rule says you can pull about 4% in your first year and adjust for inflation after that. 4% of $1 million is $40,000. That's the paycheck. Now subtract taxes because that $40,000 isn't all yours. Depending on where it's coming from, Mark might keep $34,000. Most people quietly assumed $1 million meant they were done working. Run the numbers, and $1 million means you've replaced a $33,000 income. That is below the median household income in America. Mark didn't get rich. Mark bought himself a below-average paycheck and a lifetime of hoping nothing goes wrong. Here's the uncomfortable reframe. The question was never how big is your number. The question is how big is the paycheck your number actually produces? And can you live on that paycheck when you're 80, when prices have doubled, when you have no salary to fall back on? $1 million at 50 doesn't answer that question with a yes. It answers it with a maybe, and maybe is a terrifying foundation for the next 40 years of your life. Here's what almost nobody prices in, and it's the one that ends early retirements fastest. Healthcare. If Mark stops working at 50, he has just walked off a cliff that he can't see the bottom of. Medicare doesn't start until 65. That's 15 years where Mark has to buy his own health insurance with no employer paying half the bill. In 2026, an adult over 60 on the open marketplace pays an average of around $1,400 a month for a single plan. For a couple, that pre-Medicare gap can realistically run $15,000 to $25,000 a year, every year before anyone is even sick. Now go back to Mark's $40,000 paycheck. Take $20,000 of it and hand it to a health insurance company. Mark is now living on $20,000 a year. He didn't retire rich. He retired into a part-time job's worth of income while paying full-time prices for being 50 and uninsured by an employer. And that's the good scenario, the one where nobody gets seriously sick. A 65-year-old couple retiring today should expect to spend somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000 on healthcare across retirement, and that doesn't even include long-term care. That number comes straight off the top of Mark's million. Hitting $1 million at 50 doesn't make the healthcare problem smaller. It makes it your entire problem. Because now there's no employer subsidy standing between you and the real price of being alive in a body that's getting older. Now here's the landmine that turns a survivable plan into a catastrophe, and it's pure timing. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it's the single most underrated danger for anyone who retires young. Two retirees can earn the exact same average return over 30 years and end up in completely different universes, purely based on when the bad years happen. If your worst years come early, while you're pulling money out, you're selling investments at the bottom, and that money is gone before it ever gets to recover. Let me make it concrete with Mark. Mark retires at 50 with $1 million. Imagine the market drops 40% in his first year. His million is now $600,000. But Mark still needs his $40,000 to live, so he pulls it out of a shrinking account. He's now selling at the worst possible moment, and the shares he sold can never participate in the recovery. A crash like that in year one can cut a retirement short by a full decade. Same portfolio, same average return over time, but because the pain came early, the money runs out 10 years sooner. Here's the cruel part. Mark has no control over when the crash comes. He can't schedule the market. What he can control is whether he's forced to sell into it. The standard defense is keeping 1 to 2 years of expenses in cash, so that when the market drops, you spend the cash and leave your investments alone to recover. Mark, in his celebration, did the opposite. He felt rich, he felt safe, and he kept almost nothing in cash because cash felt like it was missing out. Here's a cost that never sends you a bill, never shows up on a statement, and quietly eats more of Mark's retirement than any market crash: inflation. When Mark looks at his $40,000 paycheck, he's thinking about what 40,000 buys today. But Mark might live to 90. That's 40 years. At just 3% inflation, prices double in about 24 years. So the $40,000 that feels tight but livable at 50 becomes the buying power of $20,000 by the time Mark is in his mid-70s. Same number on the check, half the groceries. Inflation ran at 3.8% this spring, and that's the thing people miss. Inflation isn't a single event you survive once. It's a force that compounds against you every single year. In the background, whether the market is up or down. The 4% rule was built decades ago, in an era when inflation averaged 2 to 3%. Today, with longer lifespans and stickier prices, a lot of planners think the truly safe number is lower, maybe 3.5%, which on $1 million is $35,000, not $40,000. The $1 million Mark is so proud of is being quietly taxed every year by a force he can't see and can't vote out. The only defense against a cost that compounds is to have your money compound faster. And that is exactly the engine Mark is about to switch off, right when he needs it most, because the balance made him feel like he could stop. Now let's talk about the most expensive mistake of all, the one that doesn't hurt today and costs the most tomorrow. Mark is standing at the steepest part of the compounding curve, and he's about to step off it. Here's something most people never internalize about how money grows. The dollars you have at 50 are the most powerful dollars you will ever own, because they have the most fuel behind them and still have real time ahead. A dollar invested at 25 has decades to grow, sure, but you only had a few dollars at 25. At 50, Mark has $1 million and still potentially 15 to 20, years before he truly needs to touch most of it. That million, left alone at 7%, doubles to $2 million in about a decade and pushes toward $3 or $4 million in 15 years. The biggest leaps in Mark's entire financial life are the ones that happen after the million, not before it. Here's the tragedy. Mark thinks the hard part is over. He thinks the million was the destination. But the million was the engine finally getting big enough to do the real work. Switching to defensive, low-growth investments at 50 doesn't protect Mark's wealth. It freezes it at the exact moment it was about to do the heaviest lifting of his life. $1 million at 7% for 15 years is about $2.7 million. The same million at 3% is about $1.6 million. Mark didn't lose that $1.1 million in a crash. He gave it away voluntarily by mistaking the most important growth years of his life for a finish line. And here's the final trap, the one that's waiting the day after you hit your number. Lifestyle creep and the salesman who shows up to help it along. The moment Mark felt like a millionaire, his spending quietly reset. The nicer car, the upgraded vacation, the little luxuries that felt earned. None of them felt reckless. Each one felt like a reasonable reward. But lifestyle creep is one of the deadliest destroyers of long-term wealth. Precisely because no single purchase ever feels like the problem. It's the new baseline that's the problem. Mark didn't just spend $10,000 on a nicer car. He raised his permanent cost of living. And in retirement, every dollar of higher baseline spending has to be funded by tens of dollars of portfolio. And right on cue, here comes the advisor. The week you hit $1 million, the financial industry suddenly knows your name. A man in a sharp suit offers Mark a product that promises to protect his money, guarantee his income, take away the fear. It sounds like exactly what a scared new millionaire wants to hear. What Mark doesn't see is the layer of fees and surrender charges buried underneath. Quietly skimming 1% or 2% a year, which over a 40-year retirement can quietly transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars from Mark's future to someone else's present. The day you hit $1 million is the day you become a target. Not because you're rich, but because you're newly rich and scared money is the easiest money in the world to sell to. Here's a quieter cost, and it's psychological, but it shows up directly in the bank account. The moment Mark hit $1 million, his identity changed before his bank balance could catch up. For 25 years, Mark was a saver. Saving was just what he did. It was automatic, invisible, a habit baked so deep he didn't even feel it. The $1 million broke that habit overnight. The instant the goal felt reached, the engine that built it switched off. Because in Mark's mind, the job was finished. A number that feels like a finish line will end the exact behavior that got you there. Mark didn't decide to stop saving in some careful, calculated way. The feeling of having arrived just quietly dissolved his discipline. This is why so many people who hit $1 million at 50 are not millionaires in any real sense at 60. They stalled, they coasted. They let the most productive decade of their financial life slip by because a number on a screen told them they could relax. The people who go from 1 million to 3 million are the people who never let the number become a finish line. They move the goalposts on purpose. They know the human brain needs a target, so they set a new one the same day they hit the old one. Here's a risk that sounds almost morbid, but decides everything. Longevity. Mark is planning for a retirement, but he doesn't know how long it is, and that uncertainty is its own danger. If Mark dies at 70, $1 million is plenty. If Mark lives to 95, that same million has to stretch across 45 years, through every recession, every inflation spike, every surprise expense in between. And here's the cruel statistical truth. A healthy 50-year-old today has a very real chance of living into their 90s. So Mark can't plan for the average, he has to plan for the long version, the one where he lives a long, healthy life and needs his money to stay alive as long as he does. Most people quietly plan for 30 years and accidentally live 40. The longer you live, the more years inflation gets to compound against you, the more market crashes you have to survive, and the more healthcare you eventually need. Living a long life is the goal. It is also the single biggest financial risk Mark faces, and $1 million at 50 is a thin shield against it. The people who get this right plan for the version of themselves that lives the longest, because that's the version most likely to run out of money. Plan for the short life, and a long one quietly bankrupts you somewhere in your 80s. And here's a technical trap that catches early retirees specifically. The money isn't as accessible as the balance makes it look. A huge chunk of Mark's million is probably locked inside a retirement account. That money is fantastic, but it comes with strings. Pull it out before 59 and a half, and you can get hit with penalties on top of regular income tax. So Mark, at 50, is sitting on $1 million he can't fully touch for almost a decade without careful, advanced planning. The balance says millionaire. The accessible cash says something much smaller, and it interacts with everything else. Remember the healthcare problem? Mark's health insurance subsidies on the marketplace depend on his taxable income. So in the very years he most needs cheap insurance, every dollar he pulls from his retirement accounts can push his income up and his subsidy down. The withdrawal strategy that funds his life is fighting the income limit that funds his healthcare. $1 million at 50 isn't $1 million of freedom. It's $1 million of raw material that needs a decade of careful, deliberate engineering before it can safely become an income. The number is the easy part. The plan is the hard part, and the plan is the part that actually keeps you retired. Mark has the number. Mark does not have the plan. So here's the twist, the thing almost nobody says out loud about $1 million at 50. The danger was never that the number is too small. The danger is that the number is just big enough to make you stop. Think about what would actually have to be true for $1 million at 50 to be a catastrophe. It would have to arrive at the exact moment you have the most growth still ahead of you. It would have to feel like enough, so you stop adding to it. It would have to feel safe, so you stop taking the risk that grows it. It would have to feel like a reward, so you start spending against it. And it would have to feel like a finish line, so you quit the race with the most valuable miles still in front of you. That's not a small number failing you. That's a medium number sabotaging you by feeling like a big one. A truly small number, say 100,000 at 50, would never fool you. You'd know you had to keep going. And a truly large number, say 10 million at 50, genuinely would let you stop. The million is the most dangerous number precisely because it sits in the exact middle, big enough to whisper you can relax now, small enough that relaxing will quietly ruin you. Here's the one line to remember. The most dangerous number in your financial life is the first one that feels like enough. Because the feeling of enough is what ends the behavior that creates more. Mark didn't get unlucky. Mark got a feeling and he believed it. The million didn't fail him. The story he told himself about the million is what cost him almost 2 million more. And the only thing standing between Mark and Maya, between the man who stalls and the woman who triples, was whether they treated the number as a destination or a checkpoint. Same age, same million, completely different lives. Decided entirely by what they did the week the number arrived. And if you're sitting there at 40 or 45 or 55 doing the same math in your head, understand what this really means. The dangerous moment isn't the day you're broke. The dangerous moment is the day you first feel rich. That's the day your guard drops. That's the day the salesman calls, the lifestyle creeps, the saving stops, and the safe-feeling decisions start quietly costing you the most. Protect yourself hardest at the exact moment you feel like you can finally relax. So what should Mark actually do, standing there at 50 with his $1 million and his screenshot? Almost nothing dramatic. That's the point. He should keep contributing, even a little, because the habit is worth more than the amount. He should keep his money growing, because 15 years of compounding is the most valuable asset he owns and he can never buy it back. He should keep his spending flat because the baseline he sets now is the baseline he funds for 40 years. He should hold a cushion of cash so a bad year can't force him to sell at the bottom. And he should treat the million as a checkpoint, not a trophy, because the moment a number becomes a trophy, you stop adding to it. None of that is exciting, none of it will trend. But that's the difference between the people who hit a million and the people who keep it and grow it. The most important financial decision you can make is knowing the difference between a number that's a finish line and a number that's a starting gun, and almost everyone gets it backwards. So the next time you hit a goal that feels like enough before you celebrate, ask one question. Is this a destination or is this a checkpoint? Because at 50 with 40 years still in front of you, the honest answer is almost always a checkpoint. Do the math. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day.